Ms. Meng, I thank you very much for your time. Now, firstly, China is facing mounting pressure from the United States, Japan, and Europe to allow its currency, the yuan, to appreciate. And can you give us the background to this development?
Yes, and the background is consistent increase of Chinese export has contributed to widen trade deficit. To some extent, the major trade partners of China. For example, the American trade deficit to China increased up to $100 billion in 2002, and also $40 billion in Europe, and more than $20 billion in Japan. Because massive flourishing of Chinese products, the products made in these countries have been receiving mounting pressure. This results in complaints from local manufacturers. In response to these complaints, these governments have decided and started to put pressures to Chinese government to revalue yuan.
Well, I'm sure with the elections coming up, the Bush administration is stepping up pressure on the Chinese government. Now, the thorny issue has been brought up in various occasions in recent months. The finance ministers at the Asia-Europe meeting in July, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting in Phuket, Thailand, early September, for example, not to mention U.S. Treasury Secretary John Snow's so-called currency diplomacy in Asia also earlier this month. Now, there's no doubt that the issue will be addressed in the summit meeting of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum next month. Now, could you remind us how China's currency policy had been viewed in these meetings?
Although facing pressures from the countries, the Chinese government, I believe, will not change the currency policy for the time being. So, yuan will keep consistent.
Well, it certainly sounds like that. Now, how do you yourself view the exchange rate of the yuan? Do you share the view that it's unfairly undervalued?
Yes, I think it is very difficult to accurate judgment on exchange rate of a nation's currency. There is no absolute standard for the judgment. On one hand, yuan looks like undervalued due to increasing competitiveness of Chinese products and trade deficit in the other countries. However, on the other hand, in fact, it needs to notice that the most competitive manufacturers in China are foreign companies and grown-up local private companies. The foreign companies contribute to more than 50% of total Chinese exports. If yuan value goes up, it will increase production cost to these foreign companies in China as well. And this potential impact should not be ignored.
So what conditions need to be met for the Chinese government to adopt a market-based exchange rate?
The Chinese government has repeatedly emphasized to keep yuan exchange rate stable. Although China has been enjoying high GDP growth, meanwhile, the government has to face many problems, such as high unemployment, the increasing gap of personal income, poor performance of the state-owned companies, the non-performing asset of banks, and so on. Therefore, it is not a good time to revalue yuan.
I see. Now, there's speculation that China will in a year or so yield to international pressure despite what you had mentioned and adopt a market-based exchange rate, and it certainly sounds like it's easier said than done. What are the consequences, and what will happen if the current policy is maintained, as you say?
I think that the Chinese government will not immediately change currency policy. in response to international pressures. Rather, they will keep the exchange rate stable. But in mind to long term, they will adjust currency policy step by step. For example, expand the floating range of the exchange rate. In order to do this, they need a few preconditions. The first is consistent economic growth. The second, resolution of some domestic issues. For example, high unemployment, improvement of state-owned companies, and non-performing asset of banks. The third, establishment of capital market and pushing forward open policy to the world. I believe that revolution might take place in 5 years if these conditions are met.
Japan has also been criticized for its frequent currency intervention so as not to let the yen further rise. Now, are Japan and China on the same boat? And also, how should Japan address the issue of the yuan?
To some extent, Japan is in a similar situation of China. Japanese currency policy also has pressure from USA. It is understandable that Japan proposes to revalue yuan because Japanese government has to respond to the difficult small and medium local companies. And the cheap Chinese products are taking away their local market shares. However, only requesting the Chinese government to revalue yuan will not improve status of domestic Japanese manufacturers and long-lasting deflation. In the future, the issue of yuan revolution will come up and again and again. As a major member of the global economy, I think the Chinese government will eventually make new currency policies.
The G7 finance ministers will be meeting in Dubai for an IMF meeting on Saturday, and I'm sure this issue will again be brought up, but I'm sure it's going to take quite a while until the yuan is revalued. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
That was Ms. Huan Man, a senior researcher from the Japan Research Institute, interviewed by Fumiko Konoe.